Picture this. The year is 1820. The American South. Close your eyes for a moment and tell me what you see. Chances are your mind conjures sweltering heat, right? Cotton fields stretching endlessly under a merciless sun. The crack of a whip echoing across humid air. Bodies bent over crops, drenched in sweat, laboring from dawn until the stars emerge. But here's what most people miss. What history books conveniently forget to mention. For millions of enslaved people, the deadliest enemy wasn't always that scorching southern summer. The true killer? The one that crept in silent and unannounced? It was winter. The biting, bone-deep cold that turned survival into an hourly battle. The frost that could steal your toes while you slept. The icy winds that found every gap in walls built to fail. This is the story nobody tells you. The chapter they skip over when discussing American slavery. Because focusing on summer labor is easier, somehow more comfortable than confronting what happened when temperatures plummeted and the world turned white. Today, we're going somewhere different. We're walking into the frozen reality of 1820, into cabins where breath became visible fog, where children shivered through endless nights, where warmth was a luxury reserved for those who owned human beings as property. This isn't the slavery narrative you learned in school. This is colder, harsher, and somehow it reveals an even more extraordinary testament to human resilience than you ever imagined. Let me take you there. Really take you there. It's January 1820, somewhere in Virginia, maybe Georgia, could be South Carolina. The location almost doesn't matter because the experience was devastatingly similar across the South. You wake, if you can call it waking when you never truly slept, before the sun thinks about rising. 4:30 in the morning, maybe earlier. Darkness still owns the world. Your feet touch the cabin floor. Except touch is the wrong word. Your bare soles make contact with wood so frozen it burns like fire. Ice has formed on the inside of the walls. Yes, inside. The cracks between the logs, and there are many, might as well be open windows. Wind doesn't just whistle through them. It screams, it tears. It invades every corner of the 12 by 12 foot space you share with 8, maybe 10 other people. The clothes you wore yesterday, the same clothes you'll wear today and tomorrow and the day after that, hang stiff with cold. Putting them on is like wrapping yourself in frozen burlap. Because that's essentially what they are. Rough, thin fabric that wouldn't keep a scarecrow warm, let alone a human being facing temperatures that regularly drop below freezing. You see, winter exposed the mathematics of slavery in its most brutal form. Enslavers faced a calculation. Invest in warm clothing, proper shelter, adequate food, or accept a certain percentage of loss. And I'm talking about human beings when I say loss. Children who wouldn't see spring, elders who'd succumb to pneumonia, working-age adults whose frostbitten fingers became gangrenous. The decision was almost always the same. The investment wasn't worth it. Not economically. Consider the contrast for a moment. Up at the main house, fireplaces roared in every room. Thick walls, glass windows, heavy curtains. The master's family complained about drafts while wearing wool coats indoors, while sipping hot drinks, while sleeping under quilts that had more warmth in one blanket than an entire slave cabin possessed. Meanwhile, down in the quarters, rations actually decreased during winter. The logic was perverse, but perfectly clear to those who viewed humans as livestock. Less fieldwork meant less energy expenditure, which meant less food required. Never mind that your body needs more calories to fight the cold. Never mind that malnutrition makes you exponentially more susceptible to disease. Pneumonia swept through the quarters like wildfire. Influenza turned cabins into death chambers. Frostbite claimed fingers, toes, ears, body parts that simply froze and died while their owners struggled to survive. Hypothermia was so common it didn't even have that name yet. People just called it freezing to death, which is exactly what it was. And here's the thing that cuts deepest. It was preventable. Completely, entirely preventable. A few extra blankets, sturdy boots, warmer clothes, properly chinked walls. These weren't luxuries requiring enormous wealth. They were basic human necessities that cost less than a horse's winter care. But enslaved people weren't afforded even that consideration. They were investments to be maintained at minimum cost, not human beings deserving of basic dignity and survival provisions. So when we talk about winter in 1820, we're talking about more than just weather. We're talking about a season weaponized by indifference, an accomplice to a system designed to extract maximum labor at minimal expense, with human suffering as an acceptable externality in the profit equation. But here's where the story shifts. Because if you're expecting only misery and death, you're missing the most powerful part of this history. Enslaved people didn't just endure winter, they fought it. They outsmarted it. They transformed deprivation into innovation and created survival strategies so ingenious that they deserve recognition as one of the great triumphs of the human spirit. Let's start with the cabins themselves. You've already heard about the gaps in the walls, the frozen floors, the inadequate construction. The enslavers built them that way deliberately. Cheap, fast, barely functional. But enslaved people refused to accept that death sentence. They became architects of the impossible. Using mud mixed with grass and animal hair, they sealed cracks from the inside. They collected rags, any scrap of fabric they could find, and stuffed them into gaps like insulation. When paper was available, even old newspapers got pressed into service. Some people hung cloth or animal hides on the interior walls, creating a dead air space that provided extra protection against the wind. Floors were covered with anything that could add a layer between human skin and frozen wood. Straw, leaves, pine needles. These weren't decorative choices. They were the difference between waking up with sensation in your feet or not waking up at all. Fire was life, but firewood wasn't provided in sufficient quantities, so enslaved people became experts at fuel conservation. They learned to bank fires overnight, carefully arranging logs so they'd smolder rather than burn out, providing heat through the darkest hours. They collected every fallen branch, every piece of scrap wood, hoarding it like gold because that's exactly what it was worth. And then there were the quilts. Oh, the quilts. Talk to any historian who specializes in this period and they'll tell you, quilting among enslaved communities wasn't just craft, it was survival technology. Women, and some men, transformed literal garbage into warmth. Scraps of fabric too worn for clothing, old flour sacks, any textile material that could be salvaged got carefully stitched together. But these weren't random patchworks. Quilters developed techniques to maximize warmth. Layering materials, creating pockets of trapped air, using specific stitching patterns that held heat. Some quilts incorporated wool from discarded sweaters. Others used layers of thin fabric to create insulation through air gaps. The quilting circle was where knowledge transferred between generations. Older women taught younger ones not just how to sew, but which materials worked best, which patterns held together longest, how to make stitches tight enough to prevent cold air from penetrating. This was engineering disguised as domestic work. Food presented another challenge, another opportunity for ingenuity. Official rations during winter might be reduced to a peck of cornmeal per week, maybe some salted pork if you were lucky. That's not enough to sustain a human being through freezing temperatures. So enslaved people supplemented. They became expert foragers, learning which plants stayed edible through winter, where to find roots and tubers under frozen ground. They set snares for rabbits, possums, raccoons, any small game that could add protein and fat to starvation rations. Some kept chickens in secret, hiding them from masters who claimed ownership of every living thing on the plantation. Fishing continued through winter for those near water. Ice fishing, if conditions allowed, setting lines at night. Any method that could bring calories without permission. Herbal medicine became crucial. Enslaved people developed encyclopedic knowledge of plants that could fight fever, ease coughs, treat frostbite. This knowledge came from African traditions, from Native American allies, from desperate experimentation. Teas made from pine needles provided vitamin C. Poultices from specific tree barks reduced infection. Remedies passed orally from person to person because writing them down could mean punishment. Perhaps most importantly, people shared. In a system designed to pit individuals against each other, winter demanded cooperation. Families crowded together for warmth, combining body heat to survive nights that would kill someone sleeping alone. Elders and children clustered in the center of sleeping spaces, surrounded by adults who could generate more warmth. If one person managed to trap extra game, it got divided. If someone successfully foraged medicinal plants, they were shared with the sick. If a quilter finished a blanket, it often went to whoever needed it most rather than staying with the maker. This wasn't charity in the way we usually think of it. This was strategic survival, because everyone understood a fundamental truth. We survive together, or we die separately. Every patched wall, every banked fire, every shared blanket, every trapped rabbit, these were acts of resistance. Not dramatic resistance with speeches and banners, but the quiet, relentless resistance of refusing to die. Of insisting that warmth, that life itself, was worth fighting for even when the entire system said otherwise. Now before you think winter brought any relief from labor, let me stop you right there. That's another myth we need to burn down. The fields might lie dormant, yes. Cotton picking season had ended. But if you believe enslaved people got to rest during these months, you don't understand the system at all. Work didn't stop. It transformed into something arguably worse because now you were doing backbreaking labor while fighting hypothermia. Men were sent into forests with axes to clear new land. Imagine this scene. Dawn breaks over frozen woods. You're holding a steel axe head that's so cold it'll freeze to your skin if you grip it wrong. Your hands, already damaged from months of cotton picking, now face a different torture. Each swing jars your frozen joints. The physical impact reverberates through muscles that can barely generate warmth. Trees don't fall easily in winter. The wood is harder, denser. It takes more swings, more energy, more time. And all the while, you're working up a sweat that will turn ice cold the moment you stop moving. Wet clothes in freezing temperatures equal death, so you work in this horrible space between overheating and freezing, never quite achieving comfort, always dancing on the edge of hypothermia. Wood splitting for the master's fireplaces consumed countless hours. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, spending days creating warmth you'd never personally experience. The main house consumed cords and cords of wood, keeping every room heated to comfort. The quarters received perhaps a tenth of what they needed. Ditch digging continued through winter because property maintenance didn't pause for weather. Try driving a shovel into ground frozen solid. Try making any progress when earth has transformed into something closer to concrete. Your muscles scream, your joints ache, your feet go numb in whatever inadequate footwear you've cobbled together. Fencing needed constant repair. Livestock still required daily care regardless of temperature. Cows needed milking, pigs needed feeding, chickens needed tending. Animals got better shelter than the humans caring for them, a fact that didn't escape notice. Cotton processing continued indoors, where indoors often meant drafty barns barely warmer than outside. Ginning, sorting, baling. All the work of preparing harvested cotton for market went on through winter months. Your fingers, already cracked and bleeding from picking, now handled rough fibers in conditions that prevented any healing. Women faced their own brutal winter workload. Cooking for the main house meant standing for hours in kitchens that had heat, yes, but only near the fireplace. The rest of the space stayed freezing. Laundry continued regardless of weather. Washing, wringing, hanging clothes in temperatures that froze water before it could drip. Spinning and weaving ramped up during winter because this was when fabric production could happen without competing with field labor. Hours at looms in unheated buildings, creating cloth that would clothe the master's family while your own children shivered in rags. And here's a particularly cruel detail. Injuries during winter work carried different consequences. A cut that might heal fine in summer became infected in winter. Frostbitten extremities developed gangrene. Pulled muscles had no time to recover because you couldn't take a day off to heal. Working injured in freezing temperatures meant compounding damage until permanent disability or death resulted. The threat of being sold south actually reversed in winter. Some enslavers in the Deep South would sell people north during winter because northern winters were harsher, and they wanted labor forces that had already proven they could survive them. The horror of family separation was constant and seasonal. Every task carried amplified danger. A fall on ice could break bones. Wet clothes could induce lethal hypothermia. Extreme cold made tools brittle, more likely to shatter and cause injury. And remember, medical care for enslaved people was minimal to non-existent. If you got hurt, you healed on your own, or you didn't heal at all. Workdays in winter were slightly shorter only because daylight was limited, not out of any concern for human welfare. You worked from dawn to dusk, whatever that meant for the season. If the master wanted something done that required light, you worked by torchlight or firelight, extending the day artificially. So no, winter wasn't a vacation. It was a different arena of suffering where the elements joined the enslavers as co-oppressors, where every task became exponentially harder, where survival wasn't just about making it through the night, but making it through the workday without dying in the process. But let's talk about something that doesn't leave physical scars. Something harder to document in historical records, yet just as devastating. What winter did to the mind. The night stretched endlessly. We're talking about darkness from 5 in the evening until 7 in the morning. 14 hours of night. 14 hours of cold, of hunger, of fear, of complete exhaustion that still couldn't guarantee sleep. Lie there in that cabin and let your mind wander to dangerous places. Where are your children who were sold last spring? Are they cold tonight? Are they even alive? You'll never know. That wondering never stops gnawing at your soul. Is this the winter when someone else gets sold? January was prime selling season for some markets. Enslavers used winter months to restructure their labor forces. So every knock at the cabin door after dark, every unusual gathering of white men, every departure of the overseer to town could signal the beginning of another family being ripped apart. The isolation intensified everything. In summer, despite the brutal work, there was movement between plantations, more interaction, occasional gatherings. Winter locked people down. Travel between plantations decreased dramatically. The already small world became microscopic, and that claustrophobia fed depression, anxiety, despair. Children born in winter faced terrible odds. Infant mortality spiked during these months. Mothers knew this. Can you imagine the fear of giving birth in January, knowing your baby's chances of survival were drastically lower than if they'd been born in summer? Knowing that no matter how much you loved them, how carefully you tried to keep them warm, the cold might take them anyway. Illness wasn't just physically debilitating, it was psychologically terrifying. A persistent cough could be just a cough, or it could be the beginning of the pneumonia that killed your neighbor last winter. Fever could be minor, or it could be the illness that leaves you too weak to work, marking you as unproductive, making you vulnerable to being sold or simply left to die. The absence of adequate light affected mood. We now know about seasonal affective disorder, understand how reduced sunlight impacts mental health. Imagine experiencing that without any understanding of why you felt increasingly hopeless as winter progressed, without any treatment, without even the language to express what was happening to you. Yet, and this is critical, despair wasn't the only response. It couldn't be, or no one would have survived. The same long nights that bred fear also created space for something powerful: storytelling. When physical work was impossible, when the cold was too intense for movement, people gathered and they talked. They told stories. Stories of freedom. Stories of heroes. Stories of ancestors and Africa. Stories that reminded everyone that their existence had meaning beyond their current suffering, that their lives were part of a longer narrative that included dignity, achievement, and possibility. Spirituals emerged from these gatherings, songs that wove pain and hope into something transcendent. These weren't just entertainment. They were emotional survival tools. Singing together created bonds, reinforced community, reminded people they weren't alone. The lyrics spoke of liberation, sometimes literal, sometimes spiritual, always offering a vision of something beyond the immediate horror. Religious faith intensified during winter. When human comfort was impossible, divine comfort became even more essential. Prayer circles formed. Stories from the Bible, particularly Exodus, particularly stories of deliverance, took on immediate relevance. This wasn't opiate of the masses' passivity. It was active hope maintained against impossible odds. Elders played a crucial role here. Those who had survived previous winters became living proof that survival was possible. Their presence, their stories, their continued existence was a form of resistance against despair. They taught coping strategies, both practical and psychological. They reminded younger people that spring would come, that warmth would return, that survival today meant freedom might come tomorrow. Relationships deepened in winter's forced proximity. Marriages strengthened or fractured under pressure. Friendships became lifelines. The community bonds that formed in those frozen quarters were forged in circumstances that tested every limit of human endurance. And somewhere, in the darkest hours, people planned. They planned escapes that would happen in spring. They planned resistance. They planned how to protect their children. Planning was its own form of psychological survival because it insisted on a future where things might be different. The psychological resilience required to survive winter and slavery doesn't fit into neat historical narratives. It's messy, contradictory, moments of profound hope existing alongside profound despair. But that complexity is exactly what makes it so remarkably human. So here we are, emerging from the winter of 1820, and you have to ask yourself, what did we just witness? We witnessed human beings subjected to conditions designed to break them, and we watched them refuse to break. We saw people who had every reason to give up instead develop engineering solutions from scraps. We watched communities form in spite of every effort to fragment them. We observed the preservation of knowledge, culture, and hope through circumstances that should have destroyed all three. This isn't just inspiring history. This is foundational American history that gets conveniently ignored because it's uncomfortable. Because acknowledging the extraordinary resilience required to survive slavery means acknowledging the extraordinary brutality of the system itself. Think about the layers of ingenuity we discussed. The architecture of cabin modification, the textile engineering of quilting, the botanical knowledge of foraging and medicine, the social structures that enabled resource sharing, the psychological frameworks that maintained hope. Each of these represents a triumph of human intelligence and determination operating under conditions specifically designed to prevent exactly that. And here's what strikes me most powerfully. This knowledge was preserved and passed forward. The quilting techniques, the medicinal remedies, the survival strategies, they traveled through generations. Your grandmother teaching your mother teaching you, creating an unbroken chain of resistance that said, we will not only survive, we will retain our humanity, our culture, our knowledge, ourselves. The winter of 1820 wasn't unique. It was representative. Millions of people lived through hundreds of similar winters, each one a battlefield where the victory was simply waking up the next morning. The cumulative weight of that suffering is almost incomprehensible, but so is the cumulative triumph of that survival. When we talk about the legacy of slavery in America, we often focus on trauma, and we should, because that trauma is real and generational. But we should also focus on this, the legacy of people who looked at impossible odds and found ways to beat them. People who refused to let brutality define them completely. People who maintained their humanity when surrounded by a system that denied it. This matters today, right now, because the same qualities that enabled survival in 1820, resourcefulness, community solidarity, determination to protect family, refusal to accept dehumanization, those qualities still exist in the descendants of enslaved people. They're not abstract historical qualities. their living inheritances. Understanding this history changes how we see American resilience. The bootstrap narrative, the rugged individualism mythology, these pale beside the actual documented resilience of people who survived slavery's winters with nothing, who built community out of forced proximity, who found warmth and solidarity when the world was designed to keep them cold. It also changes how we understand American innovation. We celebrate inventors and entrepreneurs, but we often ignore the countless unnamed innovators in slave quarters who solved complex problems with zero resources. Their innovations didn't get patents. Their names didn't get recorded. But their ingenuity was no less remarkable. Every time you see a beautiful quilt in a museum, remember it's not just art, it's survival technology. Every spiritual you hear performed, remember it's not just music, it's psychological warfare against despair. Every story of escape via Underground Railroad, remember it required survival knowledge passed down from people who endured winter after winter and refused to die. This is why understanding the winter of 1820 matters. Not to make you feel bad, not to diminish anyone's present-day struggles, but to recognize the full spectrum of American history, including the parts that make us deeply uncomfortable, because that's where the most important lessons live. The people who survived that winter and all the winters before and after, they didn't survive so their stories could be forgotten. They survived so we would remember. Remember that human dignity can't be frozen to death. Remember that community is stronger than cruelty. Remember that hope, real hope, doesn't require favorable conditions. It's maintained precisely when conditions are unfavorable. If this journey into the cold reality of 1820 has affected you, if you're thinking differently about history now than you were 30 minutes ago, then we've accomplished something important together. These stories, raw, uncomfortable, powerful, they deserve to be told. They demand to be heard. That's what we do here at Black and White History. We don't sanitize. We don't simplify. We go to the difficult places, the overlooked chapters, the stories that got buried because they were too painful or too inconvenient or too challenging to comfortable narratives. If you want more of this, more truth-telling, more uncovering of what really happened, more recognition of resilience that shaped America in ways we're still discovering, then subscribe. Hit that button. Turn on notifications. Because every week, we're bringing you history that matters, told the way it deserves to be told. Your subscription does more than just give you access to videos. It tells YouTube's algorithm that this content matters, that these stories deserve wider audiences, that education doesn't have to be sanitized to be valuable. It helps us continue producing deeply researched, honestly told historical narratives that connect past to present. The winter of 1820 is over. But its lessons aren't. The resilience demonstrated then echoes now in every person who faces seemingly impossible challenges and finds a way forward. The ingenuity displayed then appears now in communities that solve problems with inadequate resources. The hope maintained then inspires now anyone who refuses to let circumstances define their future. This is our history. Not just African American history, not just the history of enslaved people. American history. The real, unvarnished, complicated, painful, triumphant truth of what built this country and who survived its building. Don't let it be forgotten. Don't let it be smoothed over into comfortable lies. Don't let the people who endured unimaginable suffering so their descendants could have better lives. Don't let them disappear into historical silence. Subscribe to Black and White History. Help us keep telling these stories. Because the echoes of 1820 are still reverberating, and they're still teaching us, if we're willing to listen.